Segue into the Redskins. And Keith, let's start with you. Given their offseason free agent acquisitions, what position, one position, should they fill with that first pick that they have in the second round, number 34 overall?
Well, it's going to be a little bit of a cop-out, but I think they did enough. They papered over their holes just well enough.
Duct tape.
Yeah, grabbing, bringing back. Really, you got to start their offseason going all the way back to re-signing D'Angelo Hall, Chris Baker, bringing back Arakpo and Perry Riley. You got to count those as part of the offseason. Then you add Deshaun Jackson. They had a need at wide receiver. You add Ryan Clark, and you bring back Brandon Merriweather at safety.
Right.
Now you don't have as big a need at safety. You have London Fletcher retiring, but they signed 4 inside linebackers, if you count Perry Riley and the 3 guys who
Some
are
of those guys mostly
they're special teamers,
right?
But maybe you plug them in. So maybe inside linebacker if C.J. Mosley is on the board, but he probably won't get out of Thursday. So then you could use help on the offensive line.
Yep.
Certainly a right tackle, a guard. Chris Chester didn't play that well last year, but I think they don't need to force a position.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm asking you to force a position, so you're saying O-line.
I'd say if they forced
Don't
it,
cop out on me.
I'd say inside linebacker, but they may have to come up from Friday into Thursday to get C.J. Mosley.
Okay, give me your position. One position, Brandon.
I would go in the secondary because yes, they signed Ryan Clark, they signed Tracy Porter, they've got D'Angelo Hall. All those guys are old or getting old. So you're thinking of the future. I mean, RG3 is going to be around for a while, so you want to build kind of a nucleus around that. So I feel like, I know they drafted a few guys last year to fill the secondary, but I feel like keep building that competition at that position and shore up what you can defensively in the secondary.
So secondary, get younger. What do you got, Dan?
I don't think that's a bad call. I would be more certain than Keith was that offensive line is the way to go. I mean, I think this is a team. They've got an offensive coach. They've invested so heavily with the quarterback. They've got Deshaun Jackson. They have offensive weapons, and they're going to win or lose with their offense. And yet their offensive line hasn't really been addressed that adequately in recent years. They brought in this guy from the Browns to play guard. No one really knows exactly what he's going to be. The Columbus thing has been ongoing for years. It just seems to me like Mike Shanahan missed a couple times in the draft on offensive linemen, and they need help there. So whether it's a guard or an offensive right tackle, to me, that seems to be the most obvious need.
I agree.
And not only that, too, that Jay Gruden likes his linemen a little bigger than Mike Shanahan liked his. Shanahan liked his guys to be quick, be able to move laterally and block, and Gruden likes those big hogs. So
that would indicate that maybe a lineman would be something that they'd be looking for. Then absolutely. You got to protect the franchise. Got to protect the franchise.
He got beat up a lot.
I mean, they like you said, they've patched up a lot of holes elsewhere, and I think the O-line is the one glaring place, with the exception of Laval, that they haven't really done.
I think you would say during free agency they probably wound up addressing more defensive needs than offensive needs, which was a little bit surprising, I think. But to me, it seems like there are more holes on offense, and people say that tight end could even be somewhere that they're looking in this draft. I know they've gone after a bunch of tight ends in recent years, but Jordan Reed has had trouble staying on the field.
Well, and you use 2 tight ends from time to time. You want a guy who can block, and that's not really Reed's specialty. But don't forget on the offensive line, too, that they let Will Montgomery go, and they moved Corey Lichtensteiger from guard over to center. So
that's going to solve the problems. Good point.
No, but it's a move that they made on the offensive line. So if you're going to count them, you got to count that one.
Fair point. All right, let me change gears slightly to their strategy. And I want to ask you first, Keith. What should a lot of times at this time of year, the strategy is brought up in draft rooms and in teams' war rooms about best available versus filling needs, right? And if somebody's graded out to be the best available, but he's a quarterback, the Redskins should not be, in my opinion, drafting that person at 34. What is your opinion on the best available versus filling holes debate and strategy as it pertains to the Redskins?
Yeah, I think if you go into a draft just trying to fill holes, it's a good way to blow a draft.
Okay.
Because you don't know what your holes are. You're drafting somebody that's hopefully going to play for you, at least for the length of their first contract, which is 4 years or 3 years. But you don't want to just say, like this year they have a need at linebacker, but next year they might – Keenan Robinson comes back. Suddenly they have a surplus of linebackers. So I think you need to draft the best player who's going to produce for you over the course of those first few years, because those are the years you have the player signed for cheap, and you don't have to spend that second contract kind of money to get that real good production. So for a first-round pick, early second-round pick, somebody who probably has first-round talent, you just want to get the best player
Stick
you possibly
to the board.
can.
All right, so best possible. What do you got, Brandon?
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I don't know. The thing with the Redskins, they always seem to go after like the big name, and it never works out. I mean, RG3 is maybe one exception I can think of, but maybe it's more so in free agency that works out that way. But I just feel like you got a new coach, you want to build, your strategy, your new philosophy, go after the guy that you think is going to fill that need.
Right.
And I mean, if it works that the best available guy does fill that hole, then hey, that's great. But I don't. Just the history with the Redskins going after the big names, it doesn't do well.
All right, what's yours?
I'm
Dan?
definitely best available. They were 3-13 last year, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So there's a lot of players.
it's not like they have like 21 perfect starters and they just need that 22nd guy. Like they have needs all over the place. So despite what I said about the offensive line, I think they should go best available. Honestly, it's just whether the people choosing that are smart enough to get an actual starter. But people talk
if
about
it's a quarterback or a receiver
Right,
at
that's
best
the thing,
available.
yeah.
That's where you have
Right.
exceptions.
You know what?
That's where I don't like
Jonathan,
that.
people talk about the Vinny Serrano 2000.
That's right. The
draft
Kelly,
where they took,
Davis,
where they
and
took
Thomas.
Kelly and Thomas. The problem wasn't that they took too many wide receivers. The problem was the wide receivers they took couldn't
They
play.
busted. They
Deshaun
busted,
Jackson
right.
was right around that area. If they had
Jordy
taken him, no
Nelson,
one would be
too.
complaining. Yeah, Jordy Nelson.
Right.
And now 7 years later, or whatever, they have to go out and get Deshaun Jackson anyhow. The problem is taking bad players. You want to get the best available player, and it's just whether they're smart enough to get a guy that can play.
You argue about that's a good point. I just think that there are exceptions to that rule.
There are. You
Yeah,
you don't need to draft a quarterback
Right,
this
right.
year.
I
especially
think
if you don't
quarterback
trade.
is the one exception. And the Kirk Cousins thing
Everything
was
else is on
years and months of headaches because they were so convinced he was the best
Even
available.
places where they have starters entrenched, like cornerback and safety, they don't have necessarily the young depth. So,
Yeah,
so
that's
if
true.
they could grab somebody that they don't need to push into the lineup right away, but maybe could give them some
All right,
at
fine.
the end
Best
of the year.
available, fine. You